Hi again, it's Jason from Fraser Valley Rose Farm. The plant question I get probably more than any other is why are the leaves of my plant turning yellow? And this is a hard question to answer kind of simply because there are so many different reasons. Some of those reasons are even contradictory with each other. So today in this video I'm going to go through some of the most common reasons why you might see the leaves on your plants turning yellow. I'll be using roses as examples in this video, but this is not a specific rose video. This will apply across a wide range of plants. Alright, let's go. Here in my main rose greenhouse, obviously have some roses doing extremely well, including this one, Fellowship, which has dark glossy green foliage and even an early season bloom, which is fantastic. But looking up over here, I want to show you an example of something that is having yellow leaves. You can see this one here, yellow with dark brown margins. It looks like it's run out of moisture. That's the cause of this one, is that there's too much plant for that little pot, and it's suffered some drought stress. Let me show you some other examples of that problem in potted plants, but this can also happen in the landscape over periods of drought stress. Okay, here's another example, and a couple of things to note about this. It doesn't usually give up the top flower buds or the very top foliage, but usually you'll see this moisture stress show up on some of the sort of midway down or inside foliage, with yellow advancing to brown tips, advancing to foliage that gives up altogether. And in a pot, you can confirm this very easily, just getting a close-up here of the stem or of the foliage, and you can confirm it very easily in a pot by pulling it out of the pot. And here you can see, hopefully from the color, that it's a darker brown across the top here, but all of this soil down here is a much, much paler color. It's quite light to the hand, so this is clearly not been getting enough watering. The solution, of course, is to stick this in a bucket of water for a day or so, just to totally soak up that pot, and then to increase your watering schedule. A little harder to confirm in the landscape. I'm going to show you another example here, but same characteristic pattern, if I can get it to show up here, but same characteristic pattern. If you look on the inside here, and yellow foliage, brown tip, and sort of inside and down a little bit from the top of the plant. And if I pull this one out of its pot, same thing. Dark colored at the top, but then after that the soil is quite pale and dry and crumbly, and it really just does not have enough moisture to support this plant properly. So the plant is making some decisions about which parts of it are more important and which parts are less, and it's giving up some of that inner and older foliage first. Okay, second reason I'm going to talk about for the yellowing of foliage, and I'll show you an example here. This is a Dictamnus albus. I'll get you some close-ups to look at. This is actually short of nutrients. I know that because I didn't feed it this spring. There are other ones in the patch that got top-dressed. They look great, fully green foliage. This one here has some interveinal chlorosis, which means it's starting to turn yellow between the veins of the leaves, and that's a sign that I haven't given it enough food. That said, this can be a hard one to diagnose. If you see this out in the landscape, for instance, early in the spring, and you see very yellowing at the very tip of the plant, it could mean that it's too cold outside, and not that your soil doesn't have enough iron, but that the iron just isn't being released right now because of the cold. So it can be a bit of a difficult one. It can be intertwined with pH issues. I guess a soil test is really the very best way to deal with this, but on a more general basis, most gardeners don't soil test all the time. So what I'll say is I'll just urge caution. When it comes to nutrients and fertilizer, the cure can definitely be worse than the problem. If you go out there and you fertilize heavily to try to solve this, you can actually do more damage to the root system than the lack of fertilizer ever did to your foliage. So I would say start small, start at half the recommended rate, see if it starts to react. You can always add more as the season goes along until you have a real feel for what your plants in the landscape require on an annual basis for fertilizer. I've already described a lack of moisture and a lack of fertilizer as potential causes for the yellowing of your leaves. Perhaps somewhat ironically, too much moisture and too much fertilizer are equally dangerous and even in more pronounced yellowing of the leaves. The mechanism there is that too much moisture and particularly poor drainage in a pot, like this one here, and I'll show you close-ups of this plant, will result in dieback of the roots. Dieback of the roots means that nutrients can no longer flow up to that foliage, and therefore you get a pronounced yellowing. Same thing happens with fertilizer. When you put on too much fertilizer, the root hairs on the roots will die off, and you will have a very pronounced yellowing all over the plant, even a bleaching, and followed by a generalized dieback of the foliage. So too much moisture, too much fertilizer, just as bad. This one here, this winter got too much moisture, the roots died back. It has a pronounced yellowing of the lower leaves, and on the upper leaves here it even has a secondary kind of susceptibility that led to an infection of powdery mildew. You may note that so far I haven't talked at all about pests or diseases as causes for foliage turning yellow, and although there are plenty of causes in that group, I wanted to cover off some of the less concerning reasons first. And just to knock off some of them, let's talk about natural variation in the foliage color. Even within roses and even in the same soil, this one here is naturally more yellow than this one here, which is characterized by a darker, glossier leaf. Trying to get this one to look like that one, not wise, not going to work. Let me also mention at this point, since we're talking about natural causes for yellowing of foliage, that if you get into later in the season, into late summer and fall, some of those that are the hardier roses or plants that know about dormancy or go into dormancy will start to turn yellow naturally. That's just a natural process of autumn, but that happens in different paces for different plants. So if you start to see some late season yellowing, knock that one off your list before assuming that it's a disease. Next, let's talk about fungal diseases of the foliage, and roses have no lack of examples in this group. Black spot is pretty prevalent in roses, as is powdery mildew. I less often see rust or downy mildew in this climate, but they are present as well. Now, the thing to remember about the fungal foliar diseases is that while they may be accompanied by yellowing and sometimes severe yellowing, particularly with black spot, they usually have other signs that can help you to diagnose this. The key is to look very closely at the top side and bottom side of the leaves to see if you can see any other signs of disease. Black spots or white mycelial growth from the fungus will tip you off that that's the problem. Now, the thing about foliar diseases is they sound quite serious, but really usually they are not life-threatening to the plant. Usually it's just a matter of stripping off the affected leaves, doing a little sanitation, particularly over the winter, putting down a fresh mulch, and sometimes resorting to a spray, one spray or another, to try to reduce the severity of the disease. But again, usually not life-threatening. One more I'll talk about really quickly in this group. It's not a fungal disease, but let's talk insects. And there are insects that will attack the foliage of your diseases. Quite notably, spider mites will lead to bronzing of the leaves as they attack. So if I'll show you some pictures of that as well, but once again, it's one of those ones that you'll be able to easily identify once you look very closely at the foliage. If you pull it off and you look at the undersides and you see webbing, you may not be able to see all of the mites with a naked eye, but a little bit of webbing and that distinctive bronzing will tip you off that it's mites that are attacking your plant. All right, let's move on to a couple more serious problems. I've started with the less severe, the less threatening, and I have a couple here that are actually quite severe or threatening to your plant. This particular yellow here with a little bit of orange in the tone is pretty characteristic of spray damage by Roundup. And I think that's what's happened here. I noticed that there was some spray drift coming in from a neighbor's farm, and this is what I came to, and you can see some characteristic things of Roundup damage. First of all, that orange or yellow, and then also a little bit of twistiness or deformation in the growing tip is also pretty characteristic of Roundup damage. Now, this one can be quite serious depending on what kind of a dose it got. In this case, it looks like I have healthy green foliage elsewhere on the rose, and just one shoot is taking it pretty badly. I suspect it will recover okay. Not much I can do about it, but at least it's good to know what it came from. Okay, here's something I noticed in a potted rose that I bought in from another supplier. I took it off the shelf as soon as I saw it, but I hope you can see that these are some very irregular yellow patches on the margins of most leaves, and on some of them quite severe. This is rose mosaic virus, which is incurable, and I'm going to have to throw this rose away. I'm going to put it into the burn pile and get rid of it so that I don't have any chance of infecting the rest of my roses. Like if I took cuttings off of this or used my pruners on this, there's some chance that when I move on to the next plant, that plant sap that's in there may infect the next rose with a virus. So the safest thing is to get it out of your garden, get it gone. Now, roses are not the only plants that get viruses. Usually they are characterized by that kind of irregular patterns on the foliage. And here you can see irregular bright yellow patterns, but you could certainly see it as streaked lines or kind of circles or other patchy patterns, whitish patterns in the leaves. The safest thing to do when you notice an odd pattern, a strange pattern in the foliage of any of your leaves, is to just take note of kind of what it looks like. Go on Google Images and name the genus, so if it's cucumber, say cucumber, virus, and then describe what the foliage looks like, and hopefully it'll come up with an image that clarifies the issue for you one way or the other. Okay, that's all I have for you today on the causes for yellowing leaves. I hope you found what you came here looking for. If you didn't, if there's some symptom I didn't describe in this video that doesn't match your situation, please leave that in the comments below. We'll see if we can work that out together. And for anybody out there, if you think I've missed one of the main causes of yellowing of foliage, drop that in the comments below as well. I'm sure everybody would benefit from your experience too. Thank you so much for watching.